Thank you. A second?
Second.
Thank you. All those in favor? All those in favor? Okay, thank you. Are there any comments on the minutes from the November 7, 2019 Board Governance Committee meeting?
Well, I just have one. It's one little thing on BGOV 6. Just a punctuation error. In Roman 3, the last word, just a period at the end of the sentence.
Thank you, Karen.
Remember, it's for posterity that we do this, right?
And it makes
We're
us better.
educators, we have a reputation to uphold.
And it makes a difference. Okay.
Thank you.
Will that change? With that change, entertain a motion to approve? Any seconds?
Second.
Thank you. All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, thank you. This moves us on to item 3, which is an overview of the revisions to the Teachers Retirement Board Policy Manual based on our discussions in November. Jill Lukens and Barb Bartow will present this item.
I'm going to start off, and then Jill and Katie, who actually did all the work, or most of the work, will bring it forward. This is the fourth step in moving to a board handbook as opposed to a board policy manual. So we talked about the concept. We came in, we had some really good discussions about the concept. We talked about some of the changes we were going to make. I don't want to limit them by saying they were mostly format changes, that we deleted some items, we did some other things, which we got your agreement on the last meeting. So what you see in front of you is really the actuation of that. So it was actually done, and so we tried to bring down the 10,000 edits that Katie did personally into the board policy manual. But I do want to point out something on Board Governance 72. I could just tell you what it is. There's a avoidance of undue influence, where we deleted staff member, and we need to keep staff member in. So that's a deletion that we inadvertently made. So that would be a change to what's in front of you. And I'll let Jill and Katie continue. Thank you.
Sure. So the item before you, as Ryan mentioned, is the culmination of the effort to essentially create a board governance manual separate from investment policies, but really as a guide for the board and the committees for all of their duties. And the revisions were made, as we mentioned last time, to essentially streamline the board policy manual for gender-neutral references. We also did renumbering, made sure that everything was properly aligned as far as that goes. And then there were edits, again, as Brian mentioned, where staff were removed from policies, and there will be separate policies that will be created to apply to staff in those regards. We also took a look at the committees section. It's in the board governance section. I think it's section 2 now under B2. And the purpose and intent of that revision was to capture the committee member responsibilities and then non-committee members and what their responsibilities and what their role is when they sit on committees that they're not actually committee members of. So we tended to capture that in that policy revision. And then the third step is sort of the future phases. We are still working on a control document for the history to reflect revisions and amendments to the various policies. That'll be kind of an ongoing effort. And I'm not sure, is that going to be in an appendix? Where do we plan to put that?
We're going to do a link.
A link, okay.
Have it available on the website.
So that will be in a separate link available on the website, but that will have a more comprehensive history, hopefully, and it actually will condense the manual as well because it will take out those references. There was One other item to note, in section 100, I believe it was, there was a policy that referenced our contractual obligations and how we do contracts basically at CalSTRS. And so that, since we removed section 100 and the manual will now start with our mission statement and core values, that has been added as an appendix in the end. So it hasn't been removed, it's just been moved. So with that, I don't know if there's any questions from the committee. I'm happy to talk about any of these revisions. Yes.
I'm sorry. The point I wanted to make, and it's mostly, it's in relation to questions I've had from board members, but it's also important for staff to know that even though we're removing staff from the board handbook, the board policy manual still is existent and still applies to staff. So even though it's part of an undertaking to create separate standalone policies consistent with our internal policies, it's an important message that everyone knows that even though we took the word staff out of your handbook, that board policy manual still applies to everyone in the staff.
Thank you. We do have a couple of questions. Karen?
Oh, I just have a couple. On page BGOV 17, with reference to committees, I remember it's number 2. Shall be open to all board members, but only committee members may vote. So does that mean, I know that there was a reference about speaking in the minutes.
Which page are you on?
GOV 17.
Yeah.
So does that,
Katie's going to answer.
okay.
But yes,
So it was brought up at the last board meeting, and it was taken into consideration. The language that is showing on BGov 17 is the same language that was in there before. We haven't edited it yet because that's one of the items in the write-up.
BGov 9. Page BGov 9.
In the minutes,
Page
right?
BGov 9, it essentially describes the proposed revisions to that
Right.
section.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So I've marked that too. And then also, there's another reference on BGov, I guess is easier to say. 47, with regard to Benefits and Services Committee Charter, the composition. Did we get that last time? That shall be composed of all board members, just like Investments Committee? Committee of the Whole?
I wasn't aware of that change, but
I thought we did, but it looks like we missed it.
yeah, we can revise it.
Somewhere
Yeah.
else, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, we did somewhere
Okay.
else because we did discuss it. so
Yeah, okay,
Sure. Yep.
We'll make sure that that's reflected.
okay, good. And then
Thank you.
one more thing, on BGov 92, I guess section C and D talking about proposed decisions and appeals and then designating the presidential decisions, is that appropriately marked in the benefits and services policy?
Well, that's the section that
Right.
it's organized under.
Right, right. So I just thought, is it in this correct section? That was my question. Should it be someplace else? Should it be an appeals committee charter or under that
Under a
category?
separate section for appeals.
Okay,
I mean, that could be, if that's what the committee, wants to rearrange, maybe and add a section that applies just to appeals.
Okay.
That's at the discretion
I
of the
guess
committee.
my question is this in the right place?
I think so, because it really does apply to our benefits and services. So it's probably why it was placed there in the first place. There was actually a question from our actuary about the actuarial valuation policy as well, and whether that should be under the benefits and services section. So, those are definitely things that we can consider, and if, additional sections would be helpful. If they're, however, this is structured best for the board is,
Okay.
we
Okay.
can
I just
revise
thought
things
I would
accordingly.
ask.
Yeah.
We certainly could look at that as a suggestion and try to figure out what's appropriate in appeals and what's appropriate in benefits and services. I will tell you that wasn't part of what we did for this iteration, but I think it's an excellent suggestion for us to look at it. This will always be a living, breathing document, so.
Right. Okay, thank you.
I think that's a great point, because I think we have sort of ex parte in appeals. We have regulations, so maybe we should look at that separately. So I will put that on our to-do list.
Okay, thank you.
It's a great point, thank you.
Thank you for bringing that up, Karen. Sharon?
So I just had a couple of things, and maybe Amy, you can chime in if you have an opinion on this. I was looking at BGov 21 under the orientation for new board members. And under item 3, development of, I can't even read my own, development and something, the orientation sessions will be developed by the CEO. And I just wondered about the idea of, could that be in consultation with board chair or in consultation with board governor, or something where it was, I mean, I trust the CEO to come up with that, but it seems like, I just wondered if that's helpful to think about. Maybe I'm in contract negotiations right now, so I think of this a lot like in consultation with, so that it's really thinking about a partnership between the CEO and board leadership to develop those materials as a suggestion, or I don't know what your opinion is, Amy, or standard
And
practice.
if I, so it.
See
Oh,
under
21.
orientation,
C3.
letter C.
Yeah, in this, maybe we can put a placeholder
Yeah,
for this and
that's
talk
fine.
about this when we talk about the education policy.
Sure.
Because this is actually one of the sections that's being crafted in a
Okay.
different way.
That sounds great.
And we definitely appreciate your feedback as to how to characterize that
Yeah,
and what level of involvement you want the board chair to have. So
that sounds
I'd
great.
suggest maybe waiting just
Yep.
one more item or two.
And then, so you can remind me about that one, Amy.
Okay.
But a couple other questions on BGov 38 and 40. Well, I guess one general comment I will just say, as a board member who's been around for a while and sitting next to a brand new board member, I will just confess, and this is an open session, I have never sat down and read this from cover to cover before until last week when I was preparing. And I have to say, I highly commend every board member, if you hadn't already this last week, because it really, a lot of the discussions we've had as a board, issues or points of challenge are actually explained here. And I think, I know we reference it, but it was just helpful for me to go, oh yeah, that's where that says this is how we're supposed to go about our, so I do think having this governance manual is really helpful. And I like the idea of separating it out, because I think for us, it's like a tool to kind of keep going, okay, this is the order in which we should be doing things. And this is kind of our gospel, if you will, to lean on for how to conduct our business. So I commend everyone reading it. What was the other one? Okay, so sorry, I'm changing, 38 and 40, BGOV 38 and 40. Oh, I wanted to highlight the section on BGov 38 under responsibility. The third sentence in that starts with only those trustees that serve on a particular committee are responsible, that section. I just wanted to highlight and remind myself and remind the board that was something that didn't we change that? When did we, I can't remember when we added that, but it was kind of a change to say, only those trustees who serve on a particular committee are responsible for participating in the evaluation of that committee's consultant. That's been a conversation that we've had, so like in terms of if you're on audits and risk, that committee is the one that does the evaluation of that consultant. And I think there's been some confusion in the past with, does the whole board do that, or does just the committee do that for that consultant? And so again, that was an example to me of, getting us back to our governance, and a good reminder. Also on page 40, that the board can elect to evaluate any board consultant at any time during the contract term. I think sometimes board members don't remember that, and I thought that was important. And then on BGov 253, which is way the heck over, I just wondered, and Amy, I know you and I have talked about this a little bit, but whether we want to institutionalize it or not, because I know every new board member is different and wired different and has different experiences, but I just wondered if we wanted to have something in there about periodic check-ins with new board members. I'm trying to think of where it is, 253, I think I have it. No, I'm sorry. Whoops, then I wrote it down wrong. I don't know. I wrote it down wrong. I apologize. I was doing it earlier today. But somewhere, wherever it is, when we talk about the onboarding for new trustees, because I know we have a conversation about that, but then just having some kind of maybe systematic updates with new trustees. Like I think of Denise coming on board and then in 6 months, maybe having our board consultant or board chair check in and just having that be part of our regular onboarding. It's not just at the beginning, but it's periodic through their tenure. And that's all I have.
Great, thank you. Matt?
Thank you. Quick question. I know for the educational items, which I guess in the last year is kind of a new way for board members that are not on a committee to be able to engage with whatever the topic is. And I was trying to go through some old agenda items, but I don't remember, and subsequently, I don't know if that means that it should be in this language that we're looking at that stipulated that within the agenda item, that it stipulates it is an educational item each time. So that way it's very clear to the board members that, whenever going into an item that they're able to speak. I don't think that any of us want to speak out of turn or, create any issue, that type of thing. But I was trying to remember if it's stipulated in the agenda, hey, this is an educational item, and therefore, obviously.
I don't think we're entirely consistent.
Yeah.
That's a great note.
Yeah, I just don't, and because of that, I couldn't clarify my own answer, my own question, but because of that, I wasn't sure if there would be a need for it to be in this language as well, to require that it's kind of in the agenda whenever that gets published at all. But just a thought. So.
Does it need to be in the policy, Brian, or is that just something we can do by practice?
Well, I was going to sort of back up a little bit because I think Sharon's comments really highlight what we're doing here. So if you look at item number 5 and Board Governance 255, there's a suggestion on a change in policy language addressing benefits and services as a committee of the whole. And the reason I wanted to highlight that, and it also goes to Matt's comment, is that what we're doing in item 3 is streamlining the handbook and separating it out from the policy manual. But it's always been sort of your bread and butter work on the committee to revise the policy manual on an ongoing basis and look for changes and things that you do. And so it's a great point that taking it from a 186-page manual to something more manageable allows board members to review it. But I do not necessarily want anyone to feel that this is the only shot that you're going to get at the board policy manual handbook. So this is really the next step into paring it down. These are great suggestions, and those that we can do, we should, but also some of those suggestions are something that would also be a part of your regular agenda and regular work plan to sort of take a look at some of these other policies. As a matter of fact, I believe once we move on to this item, that's what Amy's going to be doing for sort of the rest of the meeting. So it's we accomplish this one little next step, and then we continue on addressing all of your board governance issues and your changes in the policy. So I just wanted to, because you're changing that on 255 to address the benefits and services as a committee of the whole. I'm just putting it in perspective.
Thank you. Thank you. Does somebody else have any other questions or comments? So at this point, is this just for information only, or do we need to adopt?
It's for information. If you want to take action on it, that's fine. To move the changes as revised, we can do that and then bring it back to you.
Can you ring in, Karen?
I'm sorry. And then you did do the gender neutral language changes, correct?
Yes, those are
throughout the
incorporated.
policy.
Okay. I may have found one more, BGov 260, number 4 at the top. This is, yeah,
We haven't approved the handbook, so
Okay.
the revisions and the later items are based on the existing policy.
okay,
That's why, yeah.
okay.
We might actually be doing this in a little bit confusing order. I
Okay.
apologize for that.
I'm easily confused.
Yes.
Well, no, but they gave us the existing policy and then the edited
Right,
policy. So
right.
you're looking at the existing, which is not
Yeah,
edited.
okay.
I don't know what the perfect answer is, but it is a little, even with some of the earlier stuff with CIS, it's challenging to have 2 copies of something. It's almost, I don't know. I don't know if it's track changes or what's the best way to review things and changes, but
Yeah.
it does get a little confusing, but I think I got it.
I'm
But
easily confused.
no, hey, listen, it's also 3:00 in the afternoon, so it's all good.
Thank you.
Thank you. Jill, this has been a big project, and we really appreciate you working so hard on this, your team working so hard on it. And at this point, what is the pleasure of the committee? Do we want to approve the changes as they are now, and then, as Brian suggested, look to the future to continue improving it?
I'm fine with moving approval.
Okay, so just one, well, just discussion. Okay, so
Karen,
on
can
the
you bring
point
it-
that I just
You need to
raised,
put,
Sorry.
on the point that I just raised, so BGov 267, should that, is that the one that I should have been looking at?
No, so that relates to another agenda item. And so they're basically, the substance of those policies is going to be the same in the revised version of the manual itself. There's the gender neutrality language that's been changed, and then there's, formatting and sections have
Okay.
been moved. But as far as substance of those,
Right.
that should be the same
Same, okay.
in
Yeah, they
the
were.
draft version of the complete manual.
Okay.
And then Amy will be discussing, making changes to the actual substance
Got it.
of those policies.
Okay.
So, yeah.
All right, thanks.
And we didn't have your permission yet to use the new language in the handbooks. That's why all the other revisions
Okay.
are based on the old policy manual.
Okay.
Now that well, I don't know, I don't want to anticipate the vote, but
Yeah, I'll second it.
I'll second
Second it.
Okay, so it's been approved and seconded. All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Well, thank you.
Thank
Thanks so
you.
much, Jill.
I just want to clarify, does that include the new language regarding committees as proposed?
Yes.
Okay.
now we have a board governance manual and policies.
Yes. And I know Katie doesn't want to be recognized, but she did pretty much all of the work in preparing those revisions.
That's always how it is, Katie.
Thank you, Katie.
It was a lot of work.
I was a grad student once, I know what that.
Style guide.
Yes, yeah.
What it is.
Yeah.
That is a lot of work. Okay, well, thank you. So moving on to item 4, which is the first reading of proposed changes to the Teachers Retirement Board Policy Manual to include language about succession planning. So Amy McDuffie will present on this item.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the committee. Good to talk with you about this topic this afternoon. There's been lots of good work that's been done by the board over the last, 3 to 5 years in particular. I wanted to invite Melissa Norsha up to join me since she and I have been partners in crime, so to speak, on so many of the routine succession planning activities. So the purpose today is to share with you the first draft of a new succession planning policy. It focuses on the long-range practices that the board has embraced and implemented over the years, with, of course, the recognition that your short-term succession practices are, of course, already taken care of with your organizational structure and a myriad of other things that go along with that. So this is an information item. We're not really seeking any action today, but just feedback from you on how this looks. And I thought I would start with the why, just to center us all around that. And again, this is something that, as a practice, the board has embraced and implemented now over the past several years, but linking back really to the early 2010s, is that right? So you have a longstanding history with this, and the practices have been very comprehensive. They have been focused on implementing best practices, some of which come from the corporate sector. of course, succession planning is one of the board's most important responsibilities. So it makes sense now that you have a rhythm and a routine around your long-range succession practices to codify the policy positions around that. So that's what we aim to do. So what did we do and how did we approach it in terms of the policy? One component of our research on this was to actually canvass peers, both here in the US and then also some in Canada as well, that we knew from a public pension plan perspective were engaging in some type of succession planning. So Melissa can talk about the details of what we found in that research to the extent there's interest in diving deep into that. And then the second thing that we did, if you look at the policy, it should feel pretty familiar to you. When you look at the activities that it contemplates, we really tried to take a principles-based approach to identifying what the aims of the policy were, and then what the roles and responsibilities are, both at the board level and then with respect to your CEO and CIO and how they approach succession for the rest of the organization. So that's how we couch that line that between governance and management within the policy. So, Madam Chair, I'd say at the pleasure of the committee, I'd be happy to walk through, if you'd like me to, the policy as it is, or if you just want to go to any questions that you have. I think about 4 key issues that I'd like to get the committee's direction on. First, do you think we're on the right track with this? That's always the most important place to start. Second, of course, if you think we missed anything big, we'd like to hear about that as well. The third part would be the gut check around if you had to read something twice before you understood it, that's another area that we absolutely want to hear about. Sometimes things make all the sense in the world to us when we're drafting it, but then when you read it, you see something else, or you may not understand it. So that's an important check-in. And then the last is if there's any other questions or comments or thoughts that you have, points of clarification that you'd like to have called out specifically, given your knowledge of what you've gone through over the last several years, we'd like to hear that too. So, Madam Chair, I'll turn it back to you for any questions.
Thank you. I think we have a couple. Sharon?
So on your first question, on the right track, yes, I would say I think so. I believe so. The question I had was, you said we've been talking about succession planning since 2010. Is that kind of the date?
Yeah.
So in your experience in talking to other institutional investors, I'm assuming other boards have these conversations. Do any of them have succession policies and/or not? I hate doing this. Like, why didn't we have one in 2010? But I'm just curious about, at least in my experience, I hear other people having these conversations, but it seems like it's not really codified in a policy, and it seems like we're doing that now, which my understanding is that's unique in some ways to have a succession policy, not a process.
Yeah.
So can you just talk a little bit about, the evolution for us to go from 2010 to 2020, 10 years, 10 years of time to having a policy now, and then what you're seeing on other boards in terms of how they manage this, because it is to me a risk management. It's strategic thinking because it's
Yeah.
So can you talk about that a little bit?
Sure. And I'll invite Melissa to jump in as well about the peers that we canvassed as part of this process. But the short answer is that there's been evolution in this from a public pension plan standpoint. And I think CalSTRS is at the front of that. So let me flip to you and let you talk about the peer research, and then we'll come back about what we're seeing other boards do, if that works.
That's fine. Yeah, so I went ahead and canvassed, when I partnered with Amy on this last year, canvassed the public pension systems nationally and then also in the state of California. And a majority of them did not respond, so I don't know what policies or actions that they may have. But the small group that did, actually, it's not that they're not executing on strategies or actually going through the succession planning process, but the policy itself or documents to share, they didn't have any. And so the response back really was, hey, we don't have anything to share, but can you share with us your policy? And so back to Amy's point, we really kind of are at the forefront, I think, of establishing a board level policy. And also it cascades down into the organization because where you see the CEO and CIO responsibility, internally we actually have plans in place and strategies that we execute on to support succession planning. So I hope that answers the question, but there wasn't a lot. I did receive a couple of samples of policy. Wyoming had one and Missouri. Their focus was more in alignment with the search, that recruitment ready planning, as opposed to the more broader succession planning readiness.
Yeah. And that's the point of it. The policies that I've seen and used from other public pension plans are focused on the search, that short term. And I think there's a couple of reasons for why we're now seeing the shift. One, of course, is that you have generations cycling through the workforce, and who happens to be in these very senior positions are the baby boomers who are going to be cycling into a different phase of their life. And so you have a more pressing need, I'd say right now, to have some kind of policy and make sure that you institutionalize or pass on the institutional knowledge that they have and make sure that there's preparedness within the organization. Yeah. But the other part of the backdrop is that you have to recognize that there's also constraints, very real constraints that some systems have to work within that may prevent them from doing the type of long-range succession grooming, some people refer to it as, or we refer to it as more leadership development, talent management, talent development, that they just can't do. So those are just some reasons.
I think what I like about this approach is it feels very consistent with our culture at CalSTRS of not being reactionary or having it be about personalities or people. It really is more about, processes in place and thinking strategically about the future. And I like how the responsibilities are delineated, because it just seems like it makes it really clean. Like, here's, the board's role, here's, what the CEO and CIO are responsible for. I like that clarity for kind of how we make sure we're in the right lanes. But I also like this idea of just, it just being about good planning for the future, regardless of who's in those positions. Because I look around and see just even globally in our institutional investor world, and I see, either people leaving unexpectedly and then the board has to react, which doesn't seem great, or there's a scandal, unfortunately, or something, and I like the idea of, as best as we can, to have a process in place that's not dependent on what a CEO or CIO decides to do in their own life, because they have their own decisions they need to make, but the board's responsibility should be its own process, right? Regardless of who's in those roles and what the timing is. And I remember reading that book, what is it, Boards That Lead, or?
Yes. And
the language really is, good boards and good CEOs and CIOs are thinking about succession all the time. It's just part of the daily, it's what good leaders do and good boards do. So it's not in reaction to someone's choices. It's more just a strategic process. So I'm excited to have a policy in place, because to me it just feels consistent with how we conduct our business as a board. And from what I hear, just from my friends on other boards, they don't have any policy in place for succession planning. So to me, it just seems like it's an important thing for us to have in place. And I think it just provides a lot more clarity and guidance for our board in terms of what our role is in it. So I'm excited about this process.
Thank you. I really like this policy a lot too, and I think it really does, to echo what Sharon said, just capture the process that we spent so much time developing, and really memorializes it. So I did have one question, and that was, I remember a while back, around the same time that I think that the staff was refreshing their pool of search consultants, that the board also took that opportunity to use that RFP process to have a standing pool. And I wonder if we need to include that here as one of the steps. And I don't know if it would come under number 5 or number 6, but because I think it's a little bit different. 6 references sourcing independent expertise and advice when needed, but I think the concept would be having that standing pool available to the board as well too.
Yeah. And I think, when I look at 6, keep in mind, we tried to write this at the highest level possible. So when we talk about external consultants, that was the intent to include the search consultants. But I think because it is the responsibility of the board to do that, and that it's a natural fit here, it makes sense to call it out specifically. So I think we can add that to number 6. It's a good point.
Any other comments from committee members?
Okay.
No, it's really great. And everything was very clear to answer one of your questions, Amy.
Oh,
So
good.
thank you.
That's good feedback. Thank you. We will incorporate this change and we'll bring it back for a second reading at the May meeting. So if there's any questions or additional information that you'd like in between now and then, please feel free to ask.
Oh, yeah, can you ring in? Thanks.
I would just ask, do we feel like we need a second reading, or do people, I mean, I'm open to either way. I guess if that's the only edit would be number 6, what you're suggesting, Lynn, with the pool language?
Sure.
I mean, I guess, is there a pro or con for us to waiting or just going ahead and approving?
Yeah, it's fine. If and I could tell you, just like you did with Kirsty this morning, how we would modify the statement, if that would be helpful. I think number 6 would be, and I don't have Kirsty's accent, so I apologize. Mine is just Wisconsin, Northwoods. But anyway, what I would suggest is sourcing independent expertise and advice when needed through the selection of external consultants, including a pool of executive search or executive recruitment consultants.
I think that works. Would you like to
Pleasure.
make a motion?
Yeah, I was just going to, if it's the pleasure of the committee, then I would move, since we can make it into an action item, I would move approval of the succession policy.
Thank you. All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you very much.
Great. It's exciting.
Okay.
We have a succession policy.
Moving right along. So item 5 is a first reading of proposed changes to the Teachers Retirement Board Policy Manual and revisions regarding the education policy. And I was wondering, Amy, how do you want to do this? Do you want to take 5 and 6 together since they kind of go together, or do you want to do 5 first and then 6?
Madam Chair, I think we could do 5 first,
Okay.
and then we can move into the status update,
Okay.
if that is all right.
That's fine.
Yeah. Okay, well, this one was a little bit more challenging. I know you probably saw a lot of red, and there are good reasons for that, of which I will explain next. I thought here too, why don't we start with the why? Because again, always the most important starting point. We wanted to make sure that we could incorporate the onboarding program. And that was the first reason that we took a look at revising this policy. And as we did that, we realized that there were some opportunities to improve the policy. It had been in place for a very long time, as you can see by the revision dates, and it really hadn't been revised for a long time. When you think back to the last revision, which I think was 2015, that's when, if you recall, as a board, you adopted the education requirement that you have for continuing education for board members and primary delegates. But other than that, there really wasn't substantive change at that time to the policy. So that gave us kind of a dual purpose as we looked through. I thought what I could do is just give some high-level overview and context around the types of changes that you can see in the red. I thought maybe that's the most helpful place to start. The existing policy that all of the track changes were made to, of course, was pretty prescriptive. You see a lot of detail that's in there. And so what we tried to do was remove some of that detail where we felt it was appropriate to align with current practice to the extent that it had changed or shifted since that policy was first put into place in 2005, 2008, and then also to provide more flexibility to the board in implementing that policy and overseeing it. We had some elements that we added to clarify the intent, and you could see in the track changes where those were put into place. So for example, we added the definition of onboarding that the committee approved last year, or it came to agreement on, I should say, we added the principles of onboarding. We added roles and responsibilities for the board itself, for individual board members, and then for the CEO. And then we also added some language and reorganized a bit around the types of education and training that satisfy your education credit that the policy, or your education requirement, I should say, that the policy calls for. And there were other areas that we reorganized as well, just for a better flow and readability of the document. So those are the types of changes that we made. Again, pleasure of the committee. I'd be happy to go through those changes and kind of walk you through if that'd be helpful, or if you have specific questions that you'd like to find out why we did what we did. Happy to take whatever approach the committee wants.
Oh, does the committee have any questions at this point? Yeah. Yeah, I had one question, and it relates to the requirement of, I think it's 24 hours of education within a 2-year period. And I know that we've talked about this in the past, about how we track that, and just curious, because the pension fund across the river, they actually have the board services unit track it, and they also set up their work plans so that if you attend every board meeting and every offsite, you'll get your 12 hours per year of education through all the regular education sessions that they have in the agendas. And I think that if we added it up, we probably do that same amount here. And they have a process where they send around a sign-in sheet, and then if you're not there physically, if you want to look at the webinar, the videotape later on, you can do a self-certification. And so it's an easy way for board members to keep track of what they're doing. They also publish it on their website. I think they publish it every 2 years in a 2-year cycle, and just for added transparency. And then whoever's interested can see not only the board education opportunities through the regular meetings, but also the types of conferences and trainings the board members take. So I'm just curious, from staff point of view, if that would be very onerous for staff to track that as well too, or if the committee has any appetite to talk about that.
I think we'd have to, I'd have to have GER take a look at the tracking system they're using just to see what's involved. You easily meet this requirement. I mean, you all, so on the one hand, that's not a problem, you know. I think it's your decision whether you want to give public transparency to it. I find that a little over the top myself, but I think that's your call on how you want to present yourselves to the public.
Yeah.
I'll be glad to have GER take a look at it and see what's involved in doing that.
That would be great, Jack. I appreciate that.
Yeah.
Karen?
Well, what caught my eye was on BGov 262, where we talk about individual board members are responsible for.
Yeah.
And so the tracking confirmation and everything, but then I thought, and then I asked Amy, well, what does this mean? I've always been confused on what that looks like, what we need to include, and what does include if you go to a conference. Does it include all 3 days, or just a portion of the workshops that you attended, or whatever? And then I noticed that as the CEO responsibility is that they have to provide that mechanism for the education part. So is it like did you mean like a form that's filled out, or a graph, or a metric, or something like that?
And thank you for asking this question, yes. And so this is some of the flow over that we're seeing to the next item, the onboarding update, is that we are working on enhancing the tracking reporting tools that board members have at their disposal, because right now the way that your policy is positioned is really that board members themselves are tracking this, although I do know that in talking with GER that they are keeping some information from the conferences. And so we're working on how we can strike the right balance. But the notion behind what the CEO is doing there is providing you with a means by which your hours can be tracked.
Right.
Yeah.
I would just encourage you to stay balanced on this. I mean, this isn't for licensure, so it's,
Right.
you know, if you wanted to GER someone to go through every agenda you go to, and did you attend this, not attend this, how many hours did you attend? You wouldn't want that really, I don't think.
No, I don't think so.
Because you so easily meet this requirement, so easily.
Right.
So I would do something on the simpler side than the more complex side.
Okay.
And I would echo that. I think, the areas and the systems that have their postings on their websites are those that have a legal requirement to, that they have to attest to. So, you could say that maybe from a transparency perspective, you want to do something. I think your policy is pretty clear in that you're going to be seeking this education. We're providing you with tools that you can do that and a pathway that you can do that in a way that's tailored. We'll talk about that next and the progress that we've made there. But I always agree that you should keep it simpler, especially as you start into it. You can always change it as you go along.
Yeah, and then just as another additional thing to that is when we do go to conferences, we have to fill out an evaluation form in order to get reimbursed. But that evaluation form also has a component like how many hours was it? Like if it was a 3-day, right, so.
And so that is
So
something.
how do we have to fill that out, right, first.
Right.
And so it's kind of like, okay, well, if you had a 7-hour day, what part of it was the actual education part of it? So we have to put that amount in there as well.
Jump in, you guys.
Yeah,
Just-
so-
can I make
yeah.
a suggestion, Lynn? Madam Chair?
Sure, hold on, just
Am
let
I
me
in there?
grab you.
Just because I don't want to get too
Yeah.
in the weeds with it. So one maybe to cut is it half the baby, cut the baby? What? Somewhere between where we are and the sister fund. I do feel like I wonder if the tracking responsibility that we could ask staff to assist that with the board in terms of the tracking piece. So I like the idea of somehow GER or the executive staff tracking the board members. If we can get hours for board meeting attendance, and they know that we're here and they know how long we're here. So just let staff handle the tracking. When we go to a conference, we fill out the education thing and they track Karen was here and 7 hours. And so let's just ask. So that's different than what's on here, right? So under individual board member, it says we track it. I'm suggesting we move that to, CEO and staff, or however you guys want to do it. So staff tracks our education. I personally think we have a pretty strong track record. I'm not keen on, I'm okay with it, but I don't think we need to put it on the website. People can ask for that information. We can provide it. To me, I feel like we're so transparent. That's a little overkill to me to have it on the website. I think we have a different board and a different history. But to me, the tracking of the education, it just makes sense to ask staff to help us do
Yeah, as long
that.
as, well, I'll tell GER, she'll take the numbers you
that
put
okay?
down on that
Is everyone okay
education
with
form. So we'll just take that
I think
as
it's just simple.
your affirmation, whatever you put down on the form, she'll take.
Perfect.
And I think it
that's-
also goes back to what Matt said earlier about labeling on the agenda, what is an education session and what is
Yeah.
not. Because I think that would be
Exactly.
helpful for a member that's not on a committee to come and get that education.
And I would say that, so these are concepts that we've talked about already in terms of the reporting and the information that GER and the executive office get. The one thing that I might suggest, though, is that maybe we try to find a way to put the tracking part of it in both places for individual board members as well as the CEO. And the reason I say that is that, as you'll see in the next item, there's individual opportunities for education and training that you all are each pursuing on your own that would be maybe online or some other means of self-study, for example, that the executive office would have no way of knowing about. And so I do think that maybe there's a balance that when you're maybe going to a conference or where there's an education item through your regular board and committee meetings, you could leverage that resource, right, to populate some of what you're doing, but then also have a tool that you can populate yourself just to keep track of that.
But I guess I would just push back and say though, but when we do anything online or we go somewhere, we have to always, if it's CalSTRS is paying for it, we always have to fill out a board education thing, even if it was like an online something so that would still go back to the executive staff and they could track it?
What we wouldn't have visibility of, a great example is a webinar, Sharon. Sharon, all these webinars that are free, we wouldn't know that you signed on and did a debt education. So those you'd have to affirmatively tell us.
Right, I guess maybe it's just my personal world right now. I mean, that's something I could just send to GER though, right? I could send her the information about the NCTR webinar and she could look and say it was from 3 to 4 and she could say Sharon Hendrick. I'm just trying to figure out ways to make the board's life easier so that we can do things and then send it to staff and they can track it so that we just do it and then, I don't know. Maybe I'm making it too complicated, but I'm trying to figure out a system so that it's not.
Yeah, and we're happy to
More
look at
streamlined.
this policy provision because this will come back for May. And then at the same time, we're also going to be developing the reporting tools and the monitoring tools. And so we'll have a better sense of what we can and can't do or where there's visibility or not as part of that process.
Yeah, and I think that makes sense. And I think to your point, Sharon, with CalPERS, so if we go to an education event here at CalSTRS, we can fill out a form, send it to the board services unit, and then they keep that. But, they wouldn't necessarily know that we had done that unless we had sent them more, which is.
There, we count here, yeah.
Yeah,
You'd be
exactly.
easily
That's true.
past,
Yeah.
way past it.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
Yeah.
It's good.
Keith?
That's a
Okay, good discussion.
Yeah, two things, one related to that, one to something else. If in fact there is a stated requirement for 24 hours and it may include this, and this, it would be helpful to understand what else, if you're self-study or something, what counts as that. And maybe I'm being too much of an attorney, but if you start saying that it's your responsibility to get 24 hours, that could be coming back at you later as saying you're not fulfilling your duty, fiduciary duty by keeping, so therefore prove it. And if I said, well, I did this, this, and this, and they would say that doesn't have anything to do with, or we can disagree about whether it has something to do with your responsibilities as a board member, your fiduciary duty. If I'm studying federal monetary policy and following that over a number of months or years, does that have something to do with it or not? I would say it does. Somebody would say, what does that have to do with fiduciary duty to pay a pension to somebody? So when we start making a requirement, I would suggest that we kind of look at something that provides at least a little guidance and doesn't necessarily exclude things that would otherwise be acceptable or that somebody could say, or else tell us what is the standard. Because I'm not inclined to do conferences and things, external conferences or what have you, just because sometimes it's optics, sometimes it's just, just like everybody else, we have other jobs and things like that. But there could be a legal consequence to this. It may be the chances of it happening would be very small, but nevertheless, if we're going to have that as a requirement, we better be pretty specific.
Right.
I mean, so that if you can look at that. Yeah. The second thing is, though, and maybe I hope the legal office doesn't get too upset. Because on page 258, BGov 258, the red part, onboarding primarily emphasizes in-house. However, new board members are encouraged to attend at least one externally hosted educational session or conference designed to give them a general understanding of responsibilities of public retirement system fiduciary. And I hope our legal office takes this as a compliment and not as just another workload assignment. But I really do believe that our attorneys in-house within CalSTRS have the expertise and knowledge to be able to advise current and new board members about fiduciary duty that governs California's pension plans. Because those the pension requirements may be based somewhat or analogous to federal standards, but they're California standards. It's California Constitution, California law, California's adoption of certain uniform codes that establish fiduciary requirements. Outside educational sessions or conferences can perhaps supplement that if you want. But I really do think that it's our attorneys who have that expertise and should have that responsibility to let us know what California law is, because this is what we're governed. There are federal law, ERISA, I think I've said this before in other circumstances, can provide some level of guidance, examples. But when push comes to shove, we'll be judged by how well we conform to California law. We're a state agency. So anyway, it's my vote of confidence in our legal staff. And perhaps it wouldn't be a prohibition, but I think onboarding should include that. I mean, if we're talking about our responsibility to get up to speed on fiduciary, what does being a fiduciary for CalSTRS mean? I think we should be listening to our attorneys first, and then seeking, supplementary help other places. So if you can kind of, I mean, if it's acceptable, we'll work that in.
And Madam Chair, may I respond?
Of course,
Okay.
yes.
So the BGov 258, the intent here, I think, aligns with what you're saying, which is that we want new trustees, and remember, the onboarding program is that first year of your board service. So we really want to focus new trustees in on learning about CalSTRS and how CalSTRS operates before you go out and start hearing information. I mean, in generalizations, I should say. So when you go to a conference, you're obviously going to see other trustees, and that networking is valuable. We've heard that from you. But often you have an exchange about, here's what we do, what do you do? And so you need to be able to be a participant in that discussion, which is why we really tilted this toward in-house training first. So I think that reflects and aligns with what you're saying.
Thank you.
And then for continuing education, of course, there's different parameters around that once you pass your first year. You had also asked about back on BGov 260. And you were talking about the legal requirement, and this would be item number 5, or section number 5, ongoing board member education, biannual board education requirement. So just wanted to clarify that there is a legal requirement that applies to CalPERS board members. That legal requirement does not apply here. This board chose to voluntarily adopt a standard that was similar to your peers over at CalPERS. And then the language that follows that was really reorganized. The intent was to identify what qualifies, what satisfies that 24-hour requirement. And so you can see that here, that the new board member onboarding program, educational conferences, in-house education sessions, and so on and so forth. The onboarding program itself, and we'll show you next, has a curriculum. And so that gets to your point about if I'm studying a certain topic, how does that relate or not relate? And I think that you'll find in that program, the curriculum will support those types of activities.
Right.
No,
Legal requirement to do this, we just are voluntarily doing it.
yeah, I know, but
Standard people.
once we adopt it as a practice, we're going to be held to it. I mean, and the argument will be that even though you weren't required, once you do, you better do it right,
Yeah.
and you better do it
Yeah.
sufficiently. I mean,
Right.
that would be the
Absolutely.
argument. I'm not saying that we wouldn't have a defense to that,
Right.
but
I think that
Sharon, can you bring?
outlines that. I'm sorry.
Okay.
I'm done.
Okay. Thank you. Any other questions or comments on this item? Okay, great.
So,
Thank you.
Madam Chair, I tracked 2 other topics. One was the board chair's role in onboarding. And so I wanted to bring that back up because Sharon, you had asked about that, as well as periodic check-ins with new board members. And so I think that would probably go in the responsibilities section, which is on BGov 262. And just taking those one at a time, I guess, what's the preference or vision for the board chair's role in onboarding? Is it to partner with the CEO in designing the content, or? Okay.
Sharon, sorry.
I'm tired.
I know. It's
The
late.
rhythm, I'll get back into it. Yes, that would be my preference.
Okay.
It's just there's so few people in the room too, I'm just kind of.
Okay. And then in terms of the periodic check-ins, was your intent that maybe that be a responsibility of the CEO as well, or?
Yeah, to initiate that. And
Okay.
whoever, like the board governance chair or the board chair or vice chair but I would think that would be the CEO's responsibility to make sure that happens.
Yeah, these are good points.
Sorry about that one.
Okay.
Great, thank you. Anything else? Okay, well, thank you for bringing this forward.
Terrific. Thank you. We have some other minor cleanup that we'll be doing for May, but I appreciate the back and forth of the venue here and the feedback that you've provided.
Thanks. Okay, so that brings us to item number 6, your presentation on an overview of the onboarding work.
Okay, I'm going to run through this pretty quickly. I'm going to keep my comments brief. We've done a lot of work, and the idea is just to give you a status update of what we've done, where we're at, and then what next steps are. We've already talked a bit about that. So I want to, again, provide a centering point here where we can all get back on the same page of why we did this. And we had some good education sessions from outside experts around the best practices of public pension funds internationally. And then we had a survey that we worked with the General Counsel's Office to do around trustee education practices here in the US. And from that interaction with the committee, we were able to identify a set of principles. And that's what you see here on page 2. In fact, Controller Yee was the one who brought up the concept of a CalSTRS University, if you remember. And that was the intent of what we tried to implement here, and really align with some of the best practices that we're seeing in the corporate sector as well for getting new board members up to speed. I think the quote we gave at the time, or the stat, was that it takes about 2 to 3 years for new trustees to actually feel like they have their feet under them for public pension fund boards. And we didn't want to accept that as something that we agreed with. We wanted to see what we could do to accelerate it. And so that's, again, why we did this. This was a definition that I showed the committee last year, I believe in May, that everyone had some consensus around in terms of the path and the vision for building this program out. You also saw that referenced in the education policy that we just went through. So good linkage there. This is what the onboarding program looks like. It's a series of elements, if you will, structured learnings. If you were to draw a little line between the top 3 elements and the bottom 3 elements, those top 3 elements, system orientation, investment branch orientation, board leadership orientation, those are things that every new trustee is going through. So those are very consistent standards across the intake process, if you will. And then again, the tailoring really comes down to the bottom 3 so that they align with your preferences. Although I would definitely tell you that anytime we're having conversations with you, whether it's me or staff or any of your consultants in the top 3, we're also tailoring that to your needs. And in fact, the system orientation was completely redesigned around your board agendas to make sure that you were getting educated right away on the things that day one you're going to have to be making decisions on. So significant changes there. And we have accomplished a lot. You know, I look at these bullet points and it's kind of like, wow, I guess we've been busy. But really great things that we've been working on. And I want to thank the executive staff and the investment branch. There are so many different individuals that contributed to this and getting the committee's feedback. The board chair, Ms. Dillon, of course, was involved last year as well. We designed this new board leadership module that has materials that go along with it, and I think it's been successful so far. We have a curriculum. We created a self-assessment that you all saw in October, where you were able to kind of just reflect on what your educational needs were prospectively for the coming year. And then I'll walk you through some of these things near the bottom, the prototype for the individual trustee development plans, and obviously our next steps, but lots that's been done. Mr. Yamanaka, to your point earlier around the curriculum and how this all flows. So back in May of last year, we talked about setting a foundational floor for all new trustees. And these were the topics organized by 3 major buckets around your governance responsibilities: your board governance, your organization governance, and then your plans, programs, and services. And so you can see the split here and what the focus areas were. We also established what we're calling an elective body of knowledge. And these are things that once you feel like you've mastered the required body of knowledge, or maybe you're just extra ambitious and you want that A+. And you want to look at elective body of knowledge right away. So we tried to bring some organization to this in a way that we think is understandable and easy to customize and tailor to your background and experience. The other thing that we did, of course, as we built out the board leadership module, for example, is add some ancillary information that is very important to the work you do, like who your constituent groups are, right? Who the stakeholders are. So we took feedback from a lot of different sources and made this program, I think, a best-in-class offering for this board. And it's I'm really pleased with how it's coming together, I have to say. This form should look familiar to you. This is what you saw at the offsite. It's a screenshot. It's a snapshot, if you will, or an excerpt. But what we asked you to do was just take a look at where you felt like you wanted to focus on in the 1920 fiscal year and identify a few areas, because you don't have unlimited time. Your time is very valuable. It's very precious. And so we really wanted you to commit, if you could, to which topics you were most interested in. And obviously that's in light of your strategic plan, your board priorities. So this is just assessing based on where you are and where you feel you want to go. We received a good number of forms, and we're still doing some outreach to get the rest. This is just a snapshot. It's been blinded, so you see no trustee names here. But these are the forms that we've gotten to date. This is, again, a snapshot, so this is not the entire curriculum. But if you recall, we've been talking about using a skills matrix and how the corporate boards like to use a skills matrix. Here in this arena, it's a bit different, but we like the concept of having an educational preferences matrix, because this helps us at a cumulative level look and thread better planning practices through in terms of for example, if there's 4 or 5 trustees that are wanting to learn on a certain topic, is that then an opportunity to bring that topic to your board or committee meetings, right? So we can be more effective in delivering the education to you. And then also we share this with the executive office. So as they see conference opportunities come through that are high value, they want to recommend to you webinars, for example, or anything else along those lines. It's a real quick and easy way to say, oh, Ms. Yamamoto, she's interested in information technology, for example, or cybersecurity. Oh, I just got this webinar. I'm going to send it to her. She might be interested. So this is another tool that we're using cumulatively to track where your interests are, align education to that, and deliver it in a more effective and tailored way. I'll keep moving on here. The individual trustee development plan, this is a prototype right now. And we're going to be trying this out, but if you look at what this does, it essentially takes those 6 elements of your onboarding program, which are at the top, identify what the status is, right? Make sure that we've had you through those elements, and then based on your preferred focus areas, match you up with different interactions and immersive trainings and high-value conference events so that we actually give you a plan that can work within a reasonable budgeted hours. And you can see here, for example, a trustee, that 5 to 10 hours max per month, right? How do we fit some very meaningful conversations and education within that? And you can see some of the examples here under board consultant interaction, for example, meeting with Grant Thornton. The immersive trainings would be, for example, staff meetings or a pension solution demo, and then you see some of the high-value training events. And we do that for each of the topics that trustee had indicated that they're interested in. So this is a prototype right now. We're going to try it out and see if it works and get some feedback. And then later on in the year, we'll look at launching that. So again, if you want to see that in more detail, please come and see me. Where we're headed from here. Well, of course, we have the second reading of the education policy, but we're going to start to shift into how do we brand and package this in a way that fits some of the normal routines that the board does, right? So, for example, your offsite is a great opportunity to give you that form and ask you to fill out your areas of interest. So we're going to try to couple it into behaviors and actions that you already take that make sense. We are going to look at the tracking and reporting tools. And then because we don't want to just stop once and focus our attention on once you are a trustee. I always like to look at the holistic life cycle of a trustee. And that starts actually before you even sit on the board, right? So there's opportunities maybe in the election packet to set some expectations around the fact that there is a policy requirement for education and what the curriculum is. And I think there may be things, for example, on the appointment process as well, that there could be information or communication support materials that could be provided so that the constitutional officers can share that with whomever it is they want to, that they're considering in that process as well. So this is really just all about expectations and making sure that at every point through the life cycle of being a trustee, before you're a trustee, when you start on day one, right, and then when you're even day 20 or year 12, for example, that we have a supporting structure in place. So I know I went through very quickly, just given the time, but questions, any additional direction, any comments?
Anybody have any comments? This is a great body of work that you've completed in a very short amount of time. So I appreciate
Thank you.
that.
Thank you.
Yeah.
If I can't say I did it myself. There's so many people that participated in making this a really great product and something that's going to work for CalSTRS. And I think, when we think about branding, maybe we think about a CalSTRS University for Trustees or something along those lines. So we really have the committee to thank for starting this initiative and bringing it to our attention so that we could work on it and breathe life into things in different ways.
I think it's great, and I like the individual educational plan too. I think that will help us all be thoughtful about what the opportunities we pursue. So that was great. Any other comments or questions? No? Well, thank you, Amy. And you'll be back with another update at the May meeting or later in the year?
Yeah, either May or it may be the governance meeting after that, because we'll be focusing on the tools, some of these back-end tools, if you will, and we may not have them completed by then, but if we do, we'll certainly give you the update.
Great.
Definitely the education policy will come back, though.
All right, thank you. Okay, so I think we're good with that one. So item 7 is a review of information request. Do you have any, Katie, aside from the changes and revisions to the policies? No. Okay, great, thanks. And then item 8 is a draft agenda for the May meeting. Any questions or comments on that? No? Okay. Oh, sorry.
There'll be some revisions. I don't think you're going to need the succession item 5, because I think you've already approved that.
Right.
Yeah.
Item 4, I think we'll keep that on there, because every meeting you have sort of a housekeeping, you're going to review the policy manual, so we'll keep that on. But you did the major work today.
Okay.
And then it sounds like we are going to bring back the education policy.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay, great. Thanks, Brian.
Yeah.
Opportunity for statements from the public. I don't have any requests. Does anybody wish to speak? Okay, then I think we're adjourned. Thank you, everyone.